Good morning, everyone. This is the fourth edition of BRICS Policy Dialogue. In this webinar, we will be joined by Professor Ravni Thakur. Thanks, Ravni, for accepting the invitation. For our audience, if you want to listen to translation to Portuguese, you might change the language in the globe here in Zoom. Para os que estão no YouTube e quiserem assistir o evento com tradução em português, por favor, vocês podem acessar o link do Zoom que está fixado no chat. Professor Ravni Thakur holds a bachelor degree with honors from Jawaharlal Nehru University. She was a fellow at the Language Institute in Beijing and at Peking University. She has worked at IBM China and Associated Press China. She earned her master's degree in development studies from the Institute of Social Studies in The Hague and served as an associate researcher on UNDP projects between 1985 and 1989. She has completed her PhD at the Institute of Sinology at Leiden University, and from 1992 to 1994, she taught at INALCO and at the Sorbonne. She also served as a professor of Chinese studies at Jamia Millia Islamia and was a researcher at the Delhi Policy Group. In 2015, she was a visiting professor at the BRICS Policy Center. Professor Thakur is widely published author and commentator. She has lectured at several universities and presented papers at the international conference in her field. Her most recent book, China in the 21st Century, Key Issues and Challenges, was published in 2023. Today, Professor Ravni will give a 2 to 30-minute presentation on India perspective in the global context, with a particular focus on its role and participation in the BRICS, also looking ahead to the upcoming BRICS Summit taking place this July here in Brazil. After the presentation, we will open for questions from the audience. Ravni, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Maurizio. And sorry I started a bit in advance. Now let me start by trying to share everything again. Just give me a minute, please. All right, can you see now the screen?
Yes.
All right, excellent. So thank you once again to the BRICS Policy Research Institute, which I have had the privilege of being, able to participate in some of their activities for a while in 2015. And it has also been a pleasure to sort of, be associated with the BRICS Academic Exchange Program, and thus have the opportunity to also visit South Africa, and of course Russia and China. And now, with an expanded BRICS, I think the Indian perspective and some of the challenges and opportunities are something that one should really put on the table. Now, like I was saying previously, this is really not so much a matter of definitive opinions, but more a summing up of some of the key issues that India has been, Indian think tank, especially, of which I've been a member, and conferences, etc., that I attend within India, along with Indian policymakers on the subject. I think it's really sort of putting a broad perspective on what India thinks of the expansion. And I would like to reiterate, of course, that this is my personal opinion, not really that of the government of India, since BRICS is a very, very definitely government-to-government led association. I think it is important for researchers to clarify that their perspective is not necessarily that of the government, in case, suffice to say that there is no doubt in anybody's minds today, even though the West was really quite skeptical when we started, and I have published an article on Western perspectives on BRICS in a book that came out by Francis Cornege from South Africa, which carries some very interesting sort of theoretical articles also on the subject, and how this new emergent group was being seen by the West. I think today the West too realizes, by the West, again, this is a generic term, and as President Trump sort of seems intent on blowing up the certainties of what was clearly defined as a Western world order with his tariff war. I think that, what happens with BRICS and the kind of opportunities that may come BRICS' way are going to be of greater interest. And I am sure that during this, summit this year in Rio, many of these issues will be discussed amongst the heads of state as they meet for their annual summit. So let me go on really, to raise the question, because as we can see with the addition of Ethiopia, Egypt, Iran, and the UAE added to the original 5 during the 2023 summit, BRICS has already entered a new stage of its emergence. And we are already now calling it BRICS Plus. Maybe tomorrow it might need a new acronym altogether. The last session in Kazan has been pointed out by the international media as well as being a very, very important and rather enlarged session of the BRICS, when 13 other countries were declared partner countries and several more showed a very keen interest in joining the group. So I think, for the BRICS summit in Rio, this question that I raise here is going to be fundamentally important. What does this mean for BRICS? And I think this is where academic think tanks and economic thinkers and, our business planning associations that BRICS has, etc., will need to sit down and start really thinking aloud about what does such a culturally, economically, and politically disparate group have in common, and what are going to be its aims. And these are questions that are already being debated amongst Indian think tankers, and I hope to provide you with a little insight into some of the debates that are coming up here briefly. Now, as we know that all BRICS partner countries are also already members of other multilateral international platforms, and BRICS, like ASEAN Plus, can become another conduit for peaceful trade and global interactions in the face of global crisis. And I think as BRICS expands and becomes a BRICS Plus, ASEAN, another region, given my interest in China and given the close proximity of the region as a whole, one has followed quite diligently as an organization, seen how it's grown and how it's tried to balance the competing interests of its different member states. And I think it might be interested in the BRICS summit coming up in Rio to see comparatively what can be learned, say, for example, the European Union's association and then ASEAN Plus association, one where they actually went for a common currency. And we know some of the problems that emerge in the EU because of that, or some of the pushback that emerged from different constituents of the European Union. And similarly, ASEAN that hasn't gone for a common currency or even common strategic goals, but has yet become today a fairly cohesive economic unit and economic power. I don't know how many of you heard the Singapore Prime Minister's, recent rather worrying insight into the Trump trade war, where he quite categorically stated that the old world order is over. And that especially for smaller economies like Singapore, which are really very largely trade dependent, a more autarkic treaties or trade being controlled for self-reliance purposes, or as Trump says, bringing manufacturing back to America. So these are real challenges, and here again perhaps BRICS, like ASEAN, will start providing a more stable association. So I think some of these sort of worries coming out from strong economies like Singapore are quite interested, and perhaps will get factored into the BRICS summit in Rio this year. And as you notice, I am bringing up ideas of the Rio summit as I go along in my presentation. So like I say, these very disparate and diverse cultural and economic trajectories of all these nation states implies perhaps that a broad and largely cooperative umbrella approach and an agenda that stays away from geopolitical issues may be the best way forward. Just a brief slide on some data, which I'm sure all of you are already familiar with, at least those working on BRICS issues and BRICS economies. But I always find it quite, impressive to look at what BRICS countries bring to the world in terms of economic clout. 27% is the latest, UNCTAD puts it between 25 to, well, some put it at 27, but global economic output, with 42% of the global population and a cumulative nominal GDP of 14.9 trillion. Now, of course, we know this varies greatly, and India and South Africa, really where per capita is concerned, still don't have much to boast about. But, apart from that, it is an impressive entity and association. Collectively, the BRICS economies also held, as of 2023, an estimated 4 trillion in consolidated foreign exchange reserves and attracted about 11% of global foreign direct investment. Now, with our new partners, the UAE and Iran, we now also have about 30% of the world oil production. So really, one can argue that the BRICS countries collectively have an economic potential to surpass the economies of the group of 7 wealthiest countries by the year 2050. And perhaps that is really the reason why so many countries want to become members, partner countries, permanent members, etc. So obviously, BRICS is standing on a solid foundation and has, since its inception in 2009, only grown and solidified its capacity to emerge as a viable, cohesive group in the International Committee of Nations. Now let me really come to a little bit to India and BRICS Plus, and there have been a large number of debates on this issue. There have been both pros and cons that have been sounded, and I'll come to that a little later. But overall, I think, being a founding member of the BRICS original countries, India has always supported the key principles upon which this informal gathering was first created. We know the whole story, and in many ways, I think it would not be wrong to say that Russia really pushed the envelope on creating this. India, Brazil, and South Africa had IPSA, which still remains, but really largely on paper. BRICS has superseded that to a very large extent, even though I still strongly push at think tank meetings for the necessity of IPSA to remain, because it has other areas of commonality which BRICS countries may not have. Largely a more middle income countries. These are middle income democratic countries as compared to strong science-based economies, science and oil-based economies like Russia, and in a very, very large economy like China, which is now taking the lead in many of the newest technologies, whether it's robotics or cyber, or China is at the front of many, and even in amongst the BRICS countries, we know it's really China's economy that leads the BRICS countries. It's 75% of the total. So it is really a very large and hefty economy. And it is worrying that the world's two largest economies today, China and America, are getting into this ego aspect of retaliatory tariffs. And I think for the world as such, it is worrying for America, certainly, and for China, because it's true that the Chinese are able to suffer a great deal of hardship. Their history has shown that, and their state doesn't have to factor in to its policy making a very, very, many of the demands of its people, though it does. I mean, it would be unfair to say that those are entirely discarded, but that pressure is not so strong. So I think this is worrying for the fact that China is also the anchoring economy of BRICS. But nevertheless, one can argue that, there is support consistently within India for those founding principles of a multipolar world, a multilateral cooperation, and the empowering of such institutions internationally. Above all, there is support for a free and equitable financial and economic trade and transactions. And, it is a fact that India, China, Brazil, we have third world countries, Vietnam, is Indonesia. We have all benefited from a globalized economy, and we have, benefited from technological exchange, not just amongst ourselves, but with the West. So this new turn of Western economies is going to be something that perhaps will be clearer in another couple of months when the Rio summit takes place, and I'm sure it will be on an agenda. But coming back to that original, principles, there is again in India strong support for a constant push for dialogue to solve bilateral tensions and wars. And India does, I think, hope that it can push the peace and dialogue card within BRICS as well, whether it is, tensions between India and China itself, between Russia, the war in Russia and Ukraine, and now emerging China-US tariff tensions, etc. So I think it would be interesting, but certainly within think tank dialogue, policymakers and influencers do see India benefiting from the India and BRICS Plus, largely because it is, in many ways, one might argue, a less threatening partner than either Russia or China, given that their own histories and their own bilateral ties with the United States of America. Of course, given President Putin's personal relationship with President Trump, we hope that we might be able to see some movement on that front. It is something that will benefit the world as a whole. Coming to economic benefits, this is where really India stresses the importance of BRICS and feels that it is benefiting. Above all, India is, as we know, like China for that matter, an energy deficient growing economy, and its increased needs will benefit from a multilateral partnership with both the UAE, Iran, and with Russia, with whom we already have a very strong energy cooperation. The entry of Ethiopia, of course, brings in an important navigation point with the Horn of Africa region. And India and Ethiopia have had strong bilateral ties in the past. Even from the times of Emperor Haile Selassie, Ethiopia has had this cultural relationship with India. So I think India strongly welcomes these additions. And at least within the meetings that I've attended, I've seen no real opposition to any of this. There has been discussion, of course, about Iran and what that means in terms of a relationship with the United States, but I will mention that briefly later. Now, in terms of other economic benefits, some have already, India has already benefited from many of these. And of course, I think everybody would agree that the new development bank, or the BRICS Bank, as it is really known, especially its loans extended in local currencies, etc., is an area that India has already benefited from. India has already also benefited and pushes for trade and financial transactions in local currencies that, quite rightly in uncertain times can help mitigate currency turbulence. But just as an aside, Russia and India, for example, already trade even during the Soviet period, traded in the ruble and the rupee. But some Russian friends were telling me that Russia really doesn't know what to do with the rupees that it is accumulating, and I thought that was quite funny. So there can actually be problems with trade in only local currencies if the rupee is not going to buy Russia anything else. But it is something that is definitely a plus point for all BRICS countries, this ability to trade and carry out cooperation in local currencies. Now, Russia, China, and India are already set to introduce their digital currencies for common usage by this year, and PM Modi has also stressed this during the Kazan summit. Brazil and South Africa are also preparing the necessary infrastructure in their countries, and I am sure that our other partner countries will be following similar practices. I don't know how many of you know, but in India and in China, digital financial transactions are absolutely, I think they are now overtaking cash transactions. Even my vegetable vendor, my shoemaker, you name it, the grassroots work and grassroots sort of business exchange, the small informal sector is already dealing with digital currencies, and it has really made a huge difference to commerce and the facility of commerce in the country. So I'm sure this is something that would be a positive step. I will talk in terms of some of the challenges when I come to, I will mention the common currency problem a little later. Now, of course, again, the BRICS Business Council has been enormously successful by putting in touch heads of various companies, policymakers, etc., and generally creating that ecosystem of exchange. I think some of the most fundamental plus points of BRICS over the years of its growth has been the systematic creation of institutional support and an overall ecosystem that benefits BRICS partner countries, an ecosystem of discourse, of treaties, of exchanges that is slowly laying the foundation, and I would argue actually has already put in place a foundation on which greater cooperation, both at the economic and financial levels, can be based. Again, just a little bit of data. India has recorded over 100 billion of US trade with BRICS countries during 2022. And, for my Brazilian friends, Brazil is becoming an important bilateral trade partner. Of course, the figures are minuscule compared to all our figures where trade with China is concerned. But still, it's a pleasure to note that trade is growing overall bilaterally between our partner countries. Brazil is, like I said, becoming an important, and its value has sort of gone up to 8.2 billion US dollars, and we hope that it will be touching 15 billion over the next 5 years. Again, Russia and India already have a strong and old trade relationship and have been carrying out trade in rupees. India has signed an agreement for 2 million tons of Russian crude oil. And here it's quite interesting that India under the Biden regime was not sanctioned for trade with Russia, unlike other countries. And India has continued quite systematically to benefit from Russia's energy exports to the country. Further growth in bilateral trade activity is also being seen between India and South Africa, and there is, of course, increasing scope for more, and we hope to get out of that. Ultimately, India really needs to start looking at its own export basket, because it still remains very limited despite years of economic reform. India really needs to start getting into other elements of export outside of gems and pharmaceuticals and precious stones, etc. So I think there is great room for improvement where India and intra-BRICS trade is concerned. And like I said, China remains the major partner for all countries, and a strong adds heft to the BRICS countries' trade basket. Now, I think one of the greatest areas of success and I think positivity for India really is energy security via its BRICS partners. I've already mentioned its trade with Russia, with Iran. We've been trying to build the Chabahar port, and hopefully Iran's membership in BRICS will further facilitate this particular aim. And like I add here, with the entry of Iran and UAE, they will help India benefit from greater energy security. China already has a very strong energy relationship with Iran, and we know that it's building a pipeline via Pakistan, the Balochistan, the Gavadar port, which of course has caused problems for India strategically, but nevertheless, where China is concerned, its links with Iran are already fairly substantial. So here, in terms of welcoming our new partners, I think their being oil-producing partners will be very important, and is a way in which the expansion of the BRICS group adds to India's own needs. Now, like I said, there are naturally always areas for further discussion. One of the beauties of the BRICS member countries is that each one of them is a regionally strong economy, regionally strong security nation state with large standing armies, high technology, and the capacity for further such progress. So there is a degree of multilateral equality amongst the member states of BRICS, which is quite different from that unilateralism that we all opposed with the collapse of the Soviet Empire and the rise of American unilateralism, the consequences of which we are now clearly seeing under President Trump. However, there are areas where amongst Indian think tanks, a certain wariness, a certain degree of caution has been expressed regarding both BRICS expansion and what India's membership in the BRICS actually brings to India. Now, before I go into the security dimension of this, I would just sort of, point out that one of the first debates that happened, and which was a very emphatic no from India currently. This position may change in the future, but both think tanks and the GOI, the government of India, as Minister Jaishankar pointed out, that there is really an unwillingness to create a common currency, not only because India is worried about the challenges faced by a certain degree of inequality in the economic heft of each of the BRICS countries, but also because, and let's not make any bones about it, the idea of a common currency is something that India sees as both unnecessary and one that could lead to the setting of an alternative to the dollar as an international reserve currency, a commitment India is not willing to undertake at the moment. And we know that even in this trade tariff war, India has agreed to negotiations with the United States, is currently negotiating. We've had an exchange of dialogues, unlike China, which has taken a directly confrontational position. But China's economy is large enough, developed enough in various new emerging technologies to perhaps take on that challenge. I'm not sure it will really be beneficial for China in the long run, because it is having enormous domestic problems at the moment economically. There is high unemployment. There is a falling GDP. There's a falling population, even though things seem to have stabilized. But is it really worth? One might argue China has perhaps been left with no choice, and Vice President Vance's comments of, I mean, really, I don't know what some of these new world leaders think about the kind of language they use about the peasants making, America borrowing money from peasants in China and buying goods produced by peasants in China. I don't think that went down very well in China. I was just looking at some Chinese social media, and the response is quite scathing, of course, encouraged by the government, which has decided to take on the American challenge head on. Now, we know that Russia and China are both committed or interested in creating a common currency. I think Brazil has also pulled back a little on this need for a common currency, and I'm quite sure that that the UAE, given its own sort of strong relationship with the United States of America, would also be wary of trying to directly challenge the US dollar at the moment. But I think this is something that will constantly keep coming up for discussion, because it is a policy, it is a goal that is being clearly pushed by both Russia and China. Now let me come, briefly to the geopolitical and foreign policy benefits that India gets by BRICS as an expanding unit. And here again, I think that, in many ways, BRICS and its sort of very diversity mirrors not only India's own internal domestic government and politics, which is based on a great deal of diversity, but also India's constant support and its key emphasis on multilateral organizations as decision makers in a multipolar world. So I think getting in a greater cross section of nation states as partners is not something India would object to, because it fulfills its own goals and support for multipolarity. The other very important geopolitical benefit for India, really, where BRICS is concerned, just like the SCO, is that it opens informal channels of discussion and a direct bilateral exchange between the heads of states of India and China. India and China have not had a particularly stable relationship, well, historically, but in the recent past, since 2019 onwards, 2020 onwards. And this is a continuing problem. I'm talking, of course, about border fracas that keeps occurring once in a while, and the fact that the border still is something that is disputed, using up a huge amount of resources of both India and China. So I think the very fact that President Xi and Prime Minister Modi met in Kazan after 5 years is in itself something that has foreign policy benefits for India. And here it is interesting to see Russia's role. It's almost that traditional role that Russia played when India and China first became, independent modern nation states, India in 47 and China in 49. Russia was really our major partner, supportive partner, and both India and China took their 5-year plan idea from the Soviet Union, and it was the Soviet Union that actually helped both China and India with soft loans, with with intellectual and technological help and put us on the road for international. We know our first steel plants, some of the first hydro dams, etc., in India and China were put forward by Russian engineers and help coming from the Soviet Union. So I think maybe it would be interesting to see if that role is something that President Putin will once again try and appropriate. But I think it was heartening to see that President Xi and Prime Minister Modi did meet in Kazan, and steps have been taken to ameliorate the situation along the border. The other plus point and benefit for India as a member of BRICS is that it is, one can argue that a largely non-controversial member of the alliance, like Brazil, it does not have very strong disputes with either the West or, well, China is an exception where India is concerned, but we have always managed to work with China despite the fact that we sort of rattle sabers at the border once in a while. But unlike China and Russia, which do have a strong anti-Western rhetoric and discourse, and especially anti-European, I might, where Russia is concerned, and anti-American, where China is concerned, India does not have any such negative weight behind it, and therefore can work productively as a member of disparate groups. So it is a member of, the Quad on the one hand, BRICS on the other, etc., and perhaps serve as a dialogue partner for the West with the BRICS countries, because it is paving a strong relationship both with the United States and perhaps now in the future with Europe. It would be interesting to see to what extent President Trump actually, logistically disturbs NATO. He has already said that he is going to be pulling out about 10,000 troops from Europe, stationed in Europe. It would be interesting to see what that is going to start meaning for the world's security architecture. And I think this, constant belief and push for strategic autonomy that India has always pushed for is going to become more and more important, in my opinion. And of course, I think that, India definitely believes that the coming together of BRICS countries helps the global South. Now, that was, overall positive aspect. Let me also share with my audience today some of the more negative opinions that can be heard during think tank and policy meetings. And again, India is a rambunctious democracy. We make a lot of noise and we talk a lot. And so there is definitely debate about the importance of BRICS for India, and does it actually strengthen India or does it hamper India? And one major doubt that is often expressed is whether India benefits from an expanded BRICS, with several arguing that the entrance of strongly anti-Western countries like Iran may turn this cooperative forum into an anti-Western alliance. Dominated by China economically and Russia politically. So this is something that has been constantly, because within India there is also a very strong lobby that is keen on a stronger bilateral relationship of trade and strategic importance with the United States of America. And the Americans too have been pushing for this ever since India signed the civilian nuclear deal, which and became a member of the nuclear members group, as it were. So I think that that will constantly continue, and thereby there is a debate of whether this would impact our needs and desire to develop pro-US, a stronger US alliance. There are also voices that argue that India walked into this alliance by giving up its own independent dialogue mechanism, which was IPSA. Previously, there was BRICS, Russia, India, and China, which used to meet at a think tank informal level, and there was IPSA. And then these came together, and people argue that really there's no credible basis for a grouping of Russia, China, Brazil, South Africa, India, and now other countries which have such disparate economic and political systems. They argue that countries like the EU, countries like ASEAN, when they came together, had very similar economic levels and very similar political systems, and thereby making these groupings feasible, and that an expanded BRICS would really just become a forum for certain world leaders to voice anti-Western sentiment. So these are some of the sort of negative voices that are coming in. There are also strategic thinkers who argue that this alliance is really designed to ensure India does not become a strong partner with the Western security alliance, especially the Quad. This is something Russia and China have forcefully objected to frequently. And so there are thinkers who support the Quads within our strategic community. And here, of course, one might say that influencing this perspective is, of course, India's problematic bilateral and strategic relationship with China. Till that is solved, we will always have voices within the country and amongst policymakers and politicians that argue that partnerships with China that impact our partnership with the West should not be prioritized. And so, this is something that we will have to see as we go along. But these voices, these opinions are certainly something that you can find both in the media and in think tank dialogues. Like I said, India's problematic bilateral ties with China and China's economic dominance are seen also as, I might use the word, not particularly beneficial for India, arguing that India needs to be more cautious about what it commits to BRICS, that it's all right to be a member of such forums as support for multilateralism and multipolarity in the world, and in international relations, but really commitment at other levels, either in terms of common currency or in any form of strategic commonality, would be difficult for India to carry out at the moment. So really, ultimately, I think one would argue that what India is trying to do, and this is, I don't know whether it will succeed in doing so. Sometimes things like this can also mean, falling between two stools, as the saying says. India is trying to play a balancing game, and I'm sure that Brazil is too, because in any case, one might say that India's key foreign policy matrix since its independence has been first what was defined as non-alignment under Prime Minister Nehru and is today dubbed as strategic autonomy. Essentially, really, they are the same thing. The new government after the Congress government just renamed it. It's like renaming capitals and renaming streets. It's the same city and the same street. Essentially, this means an aversion to becoming a part of any security and strategic alliance that threatens a multipolar world and forces compliance to plans that may only serve great power politics. I think this is something that India is averse to. And here, India is quite clear in its desire to reinforce multipolarity instead of sliding into a new Cold War with different contenders. Here, of course, we are definitely not keen to see a Cold War between China and the United States, or even between Russia and the West. I think that the very positive period of the 90s with its globalization and new emerging economies is something that India and China benefited greatly from, as have other BRICS partners. And one really hopes that that sort of world will continue rather than a dramatic slide into even more threatening Cold War. So I think India's a desire to play a balancing game and to sort of show the world that it is really a balancing power and not either a revisionist or a power that is confrontationist, is the manner in which it is able to balance its membership in countries like BRICS with the domination of Russia and China on the one hand, and the Quad with the domination of the United States on the other. It does also have very strong bilateral ties with other ASEAN countries in the region. It has, South Asia-based dialogues, etc. But nevertheless, overall, I would say India is positive about its relationship with BRICS, that it sees really more as a cohesive trade partnership and not a security architecture, really. And that is what I would like to end by really saying that in the final analysis, it can be argued that India is committed to the principles on which BRICS was set up and is content to see its expansion, provided it maintains its original purpose, which is really providing an equitable world financial and trading system, minimizing dependence on the pro-West institutional bias in international relations, and creating an equal space and greater empowerment for what is called the South. At the same time, quite clearly, India is not keen on turning the group into a comprehensive anti-Western grouping. India will continue to play a balancing game, hoping to emerge as a reliable dialogue partner that can cut across the antipathy of various international regimes. BRICS is, in conclusion, a positive and growing grouping in the international arena, and for India, it has proved a reliable economic partnership. It has also garnered greater world attention as its membership expands and as the Western alliance that has dominated the world for the past 100 years seems to be going through turbulence. The greatest challenge before this grouping is the pull and push of different countries with their own specific interest. And this is really normal. This is something that happens in any groupings, whether it's the EU, whether it's ASEAN, whether it's COMESOL, you name it. How the group handles bilateral contradictions and how it expands its membership will continue to determine its stability. The uncertain economic climate with the US trade war and China's response are bound to create uncertainties that BRICS countries can navigate effectively as partners. Right. I'll end there. Thank you all for listening. And I'm very happy to take on whatever questions and look forward to, I'm sure, what will be an interesting discussion. So thank you very much, Renan.
Thank you very much, Ravni. The intervention was really interesting, very complete, and it was really interesting to hear your perspective on Indian foreign policy.
Thank you.
And Candido has collected some questions from the audience to take our conversation further. So please, Candido.
Okay. But first, thank you very much for your presentation, Ravni. It was excellent. So
Thank you.
I tried to um, collect three questions concerning different subjects. The first one would be about the general public perception in India about the India's membership in the BRICS. How is it perceived in by the general public and also
Okay.
by political leaders in India?
Right.
Do you prefer me to ask three questions at one time, or and you answer after, or
Whatever suits you. I think three questions together is fine with me. Sometimes they can be commonly answered as well. So go
okay?
ahead. The first is
Okay.
a question on public perception on BRICS.
Yeah. The
Right.
second one is concerning energy and energy transition.
Yeah.
India has been investing heavily in renewable energy in the last couple of years, but the country still relies significantly on coal. How do you see the dilemma that India is facing of trying to reduce uh, the carbon footprint of its economy while also uh, trying to secure its energy needs?
Right.
And the last one um, is about food security and environmental preservation. It's a question from Ibado Santos of the Engineering Club. Um, he comments that at a time he was a researcher. He met a researcher from Calcutta that was concerned about the preservation of the mangroves, and he wanted to contact Brazilians about the preservation of these areas that are nurseries for fish and crustaceans. Uh, how do you see this issue of exchanging knowledge about environmental preservation and the natural genetic heritage of our countries as a way to combat hunger and poverty?
Right. Thank you. Thank you all for those questions. Each one of them, very interesting and obviously something that, well, would perhaps require far greater, one might say, expertise than I have. But regarding the public perception of BRICS in India, certainly I think, India is proud to be a member of BRICS. There's always a great deal of fanfare around the BRICS summit and a great deal of publicity, not just from the government, but from the media as well. Business houses are also very keen. And, this is something that sort of links into something that I'm not always supportive of, but this growing nationalism, India's clout in the international world. See, we are a member country of great powers, and it's like just like there's this pride in being invited to G7 meetings, and India's rising economy, India on the moon, etc. So there is, I think, in terms of where the public is concerned, a great deal of appreciation and welcoming to BRICS as an association. So now coming to energy transition, I think again, both this and this third question on food security are areas really beyond my expertise. Suffice to say, you're quite right that India has signed on to all, climate change treaties, and has also pushed its weight behind asking Western countries to put their money where their mouth is, as it were, to start funding, renewable energy projects in the South, in the third world, where these are necessary. There is again, of course, debate, much like in America, much like in President Trump puts it rather, one might say, clear, well, in many ways, rather dramatically, when he says that the cost to the economy of a transition to renewables has to be factored in. And I think this is something that India is also doing. You must keep in mind that India has the largest population. But I do want to add that a great deal has been done at the policy level to transfer to renewable, or to, whether it is building solar plants and subsidizing solar panels, whether it is turning to hybrid gases for public transport rather than petrol, etc. Unfortunately, like pointed out, the questioner pointed out, we are still heavily dependent on coal, just like China is. And I think this is where perhaps access to cheaper non-coal energy sources amongst BRICS countries would definitely also help in what is a very, very important climate change agenda. And here I'd like to bring in that third question, because I really think where the most important cooperation amongst the BRICS countries must be at the academic, intellectual, science, and technological levels. We really have a lot to learn from each other. And we all have young researchers. We are all, middle technology in a way. Well, China, of course, here would have a lot to offer all of us. But I do think that academic exchanges at the science technology, especially where environment is concerned, as we see more and more environmental disasters, and we know that India is highly vulnerable given its large population, given its large coastline and the Himalayan belt, are a highly climatically very, very vulnerable region. So I think I'm delighted that there are researchers in India who want to work and learn from, researchers in Brazil. And I sincerely hope that this will be top of the agenda for exchange and investments put in by all our partner governments to facilitate this agenda.
Ravni, just to close the conversation, I have just one more question from the audience.
Please,
I think
please.
that dialogues a lot with what you've been saying through your presentation. India also has a tradition of engaging in unilateralism. The Quad with US, Japan, and Australia, IPSA with Brazil and South Africa, and I2U2, India, Israel, the United Arab Emirates, and the US. In this global context, is it likely that India will place greater importance on such arrangements?
I think, well, that is a very interesting question. Again, like I said, the one place, that one way to identify India is playing a balancing game. That's why I put it up there. India will continue to balance its membership with these mini multilateral organizations. India still attaches importance to IPSA. There is still an IPSA meeting, on the agenda. There is Quad is being given importance in India, and India is restarting military exercises with the Quad. So I think India really does try to play this balancing game. It would be difficult to say what happens to associations like the Quad, say, and God forbid, there is an actual confrontation between China and America in the South China Seas, for example. This would certainly put India in a quandary. However, you have to keep in mind that, as again, referring back to this balancing game that India likes to play, it has not signed an interoperability deal at the strategic and military levels with the Quad. That is something that is being discussed. And I think that is, again, part of that India's strong desire something that has been fundamental to its sense of self as a nation state right from the very beginning, for strategic autonomy or non-alignment, to avoid creating a world of fissures and a world in which the Cold War once again rears its ugly head.
Yeah, thank you so much for you answering this question. It's something that we've been thinking a lot here in BRICS Policy Center. And thank you very, very much for accepting our invitation and for excellent presentation. I believe we all learned a lot from you today. And we are always here to dialogue with you about BRICS in India. So you're very welcome here.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure. And, I really do think BRICS has a future. And a part of that BRICS future is this interaction between scholars. I do sincerely love it, and I sincerely hope that this will continue. Thank you very much for inviting me. And especially Leah and Maria, and, since it came from there, it's a great pleasure.
Many thanks as well to everyone who joined us today. We will remain engaging in the coming months leading up to the BRICS Summit, and we'll be hosting a series of events to which you are all, of course, warmly invited. So thank you so much.
Well, please send me notices of the new seminars. Now that I have your webinar link, I would be happy to join in as a listener in the future.
Sure.
Thank you all once again, and bye, Leah and Maria. See you all.